a stranger to many of us, not a stranger at all. Hieromonk Phillip, pastor emeritus of St. George, and beloved friend of St. George and supporter. He is now living in his monastic vocation at the monastery St. Silouan, near our cathedral in Wichita. To Father Philip's right is Matthew Namee, Orthodox historian and our keynote speaker. I'll speak more about Matthew tomorrow night at the banquet. And to my immediate left is Very Reverend Andrew Damick, priest, pastor, blogger, and author for Ancient Faith. So, welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming. Our format, we're going to have the presenters just give some brief remarks, however they would like, and then we'll open it up for your questions and answers. But I have a little thing that I wrote to keep it short as by way of introduction. I ask for your patience. Who is Father Nicola Yanney, and why should we care? In regards to the second question, it's quite obvious that you do all care, because what else would have brought over 270 people from 16 different states to Kearney, Nebraska, which, as many of you found out, is not always an easy place to get to. So we thank you so much for coming. Bishop BASIL and our other presenters this evening, and Matthew Namee during his keynote address tomorrow evening, will speak to the why we should care as they reflect on different aspects of Father Nicola's ministry. But before our presenters give their reflections, I want to give a basic narrative of Father Nicola's life for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Father Nicola Yanney was born in the small village of Phillip in 1873 in what is now known as northern Lebanon. His ancestors did not originally hail from that area. The first Yanney to come to the Lebanese coast, a young Orthodox Christian refugee from Cyprus, came 2 centuries earlier and was eventually ordained a priest for the village church in Almina, now the port of Tripoli, Lebanon. Providentially, these same details from the life of Father Nicola's ancestor, that he was a Christian refugee fleeing Turkish oppression, an immigrant who relocated to a new land to raise his family, and one who would accept the call to the holy priesthood, would be later repeated in Father Nicola's own life. The small region in which Father Nicola was raised was called Kura, part of a much larger territory known as Greater Syria. Lebanon did not yet exist as a state. Though Greater Syria was ruled by the Ottoman Turks, the residents of Kura were almost all Orthodox Christians. As Christians living in the Ottoman Empire, Father Nicola's people were subject to discrimination and sometimes open persecution. His parents and older siblings had survived the massacre of 1860, a religious conflict that culminated in the slaughter of several thousand Christians living in the city of Damascus. A tenuous peace was restored after the conflict, but in the wake of violence, hundreds of churches and villages had been burned to the ground, and tens of thousands had been killed throughout Greater Syria. During Father Nicola's youth, religious tensions were on the rise once again, that coupled with an economic depression caused by the collapse of the local silk industry, compelled Father Nicola to leave his homeland. At the time, many young men from Greater Syria were emigrating to North and South America in hopes of working for a few years and accumulating enough wealth to return home to live in comfort. Several of Father Nicola's siblings had already made the journey to America and encouraged him to follow. In late 1892, not long after his marriage to Martha Georgia Beck from the neighboring village of Kilhat, Father Nicola boarded a steamship with his newlywed wife bound for France and from there for America. Still in the early years of the Syrian immigration, which occurred in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Father Nicola's intentions differed from those of most of his country. By taking his wife with him at a time when 90% of his fellow immigrants were men who intended to return to Greater Syria, it is clear that Father Nicola and Martha's plan was to permanently settle in the United States. Father Nicola and Martha first lived in a small neighborhood just south of downtown Omaha. Like the vast majority of Syrian immigrants, Father Nicola found work as a peddler, Leaving Martha for 3 to 4 weeks at a time, he traveled across the plains by train, stopping at towns and villages and hiking into the countryside to isolated farmhouses, selling whatever items he carried with him. After 2 years of peddling, Father Nicola desired a quieter life and moved his family to a small rented farmstead 18 miles northeast of Kearney. And by your prayers, if the weather stays dry, we'll have an opportunity to visit that homestead tonight. Over the next decade, a small community of Orthodox Christians began to form in Kearney, many of whom were friends and relatives of Father Nicola's from his home village. Though he lived a half-day's journey out of town, Father Nicola served as one of the community's lay leaders. Tragically, his wife Martha died shortly after giving birth to their 5th child, a daughter who died 8 days later. In 1903, with the blessing of St. Raphael of Brooklyn, the local Syrians formed an Orthodox church in Kearney. It was the first Syrian Orthodox church west of the Mississippi River. In need of a priest, St. Raphael blessed the congregation to choose a man from their own members who was worthy of the priesthood. The community chose Father Nicola. He was devout, respected, and well-liked by all, and having been reared near the Balamon Monastery and schooled by the monks there, he was very knowledgeable about the Orthodox faith. Traveling to New York City during Great Lent of 1904, Father Nicola was ordained to the priesthood shortly after St. Raphael's consecration to the episcopacy, making Father Nicola the first priest to be ordained by the first Orthodox bishop consecrated in the Western Hemisphere. At the time, Father Nicola was raising his 4 young children as a widower. According to the canons of the Orthodox Church, he knew that in accepting ordination, he could never remarry and would have to remain celibate for the rest of his life. After several weeks of instruction from St. Raphael, Father Nicola returned to Kearney to pastor his new flock. At the same time, St. Raphael appointed him as a traveling missionary priest to serve the Orthodox faithful scattered across the Great Plains. During the 14 years of his priesthood, Father Nicola's missionary territory extended from the Canadian border to southern Oklahoma and from Colorado to Michigan, making regular visits to Orthodox Christians throughout this missionary territory, who would often be away from his home for 6 months at a time while other family members cared for his children. Congregations in Sioux City and Cedar Rapids, Iowa, La Crosse, Wisconsin, Ironwood and Iron Mountain, Michigan, St. Paul, Minnesota, the Cathedral community in Wichita, Kansas, and the Orthodox families who would later form the congregation in Oklahoma City, all had Father Nicola as the first priest and pastor to regularly serve their communities. In all, he made frequent visitations to at least 100 cities, towns, and villages, and many of these he visited more than once a year. During the Spanish flu epidemic of October 1918, though impoverished and warned not to travel by his own family members, Father Nicola nonetheless left home to minister to his scattered flock. One of his last missionary visits was to Wichita, Kansas. Eventually returning home to Kearney at the pleas of his eldest son, the priest found that many of his own parishioners were sick with the flu. Though a statewide quarantine had closed places of public gathering, including all the churches, Father Nicola went from house to house, confessing, anointing, and communing the sick, and burying those who had succumbed to the influenza. Local newspapers reported that he himself became sick due to his constant exposure to the disease while ministering to his parishioners. Though ill, he kept up his visitations until the very last day. Succumbing to the Spanish flu, Father Nicola died just before midnight on October 28, 1918. May his memory be eternal.
I'd like to begin by thanking Father Christopher and the parish family at St. George of Kearney for inviting us from throughout our diocese and beyond to come and share with them this very special weekend in remembrance of a very special priest. There's a tradition among the Russian Orthodox that when a man is consecrated bishop, at that same liturgy, he then ordains his first priest and his first deacon. You'll recall that in the consecration of the bishop comes very early in the liturgy, before the epistle and gospel. Then what comes next in the liturgy would be the ordination of a priest, and the latest ordination to take place in the Divine Liturgy is the ordination of a deacon. So it's traditional among the Russians that when a man is consecrated bishop at around the Holy God before the Gospel, that later in that liturgy, now that he is a bishop, he ordains a priest and a deacon. Well, at the time of Bishop St. Raphael's consecration to the Holy Episcopacy, there were not a number of candidates to be ordained. So he did not, in his liturgy, ordain a deacon and a priest. Shortly thereafter, though, that the widower from Kearney, in whose memory we all gathered this weekend, arrived in Brooklyn and was ordained deacon and priest, and spent time then with the saintly bishop of Brooklyn, one who had visited his family. St. Raphael was here, in the city where we find ourselves. He went out to the homestead where we'll go tomorrow, where Father Nicola and his family lived in a soddy. So St. Raphael then extended hospitality in his apartment on Pacific Street in Brooklyn to the man who had offered him hospitality in his soddy outside Kearney, Nebraska. My inclination is to say it's amazing to me, but I guess it shouldn't be amazing. It is wondrous. It's probably the better word. It is wondrous that so many people have gathered here this weekend, which is a repeat of the first wonder, which was 10 years ago in our first diocesan pilgrimage. And when the clergy brotherhood had blessed and erected the new tombstone in Father Nicola's grave. It's wondrous because it's not for a well-known person. Each one of us has our own special connection with Father Nicola. But this weekend we're expecting nearly 300 people. 300 people for a man who died 100 years ago, who lived his whole adult life here in a small town in the middle of America, but one who gave his life not only for his family, but for Holy Orthodoxy throughout the heartland. We have descendants of Father Nicola among us this evening. There's one that I miss every time I come to Kearney, and one that would exult with great joy at such a gathering to honor her grandfather, yes, Minette. God give her paradise. But Minette's husband is here. Minette was a granddaughter of Father Nicola. So we have the husband of the granddaughter. We have their children, for whom Father Nicola was a great-grandfather. We have a son named for him, who is a great-great-grandson. And their children, or the great-great-great-grandchildren of Father Nicola. And I'm sure there are other relatives and descendants of Father Nicola. If y'all could just stand so you can see who you are. We praise God really for your ancestor. I say it's wondrous that so many gather, because it is a wonder. It's rather a miracle. There's a holiness to which our hearts as Orthodox Christians, as Christians, are attuned. That we're drawn to holiness. There is no doubt in my mind and in many people's minds that Father Nicola was not just a good priest and a righteous man, but he indeed is a holy man. One who still intercedes for his flock, of which most of us count ourselves here in the heartland. Father Stephen Wolinski and his family are here again from St. Mary's in Omaha. They were here for the first pilgrimage. And he sensed something then about the sanctity of Father Nicola. Remember sharing that with me, Father Stephen, then from a decade ago? And it was a feeling, not a feeling, that sounds so touchy-feely. It was a realization that a number of people had when we were here a decade ago for that first pilgrimage. But we don't know what the future holds. But one thing I do know is that the clergy from our diocese who have gathered here have an example to follow. And it's not just the priests and deacons. I speak as a member of our diocesan clergy. How to love your families. How to take care of your family. And at the same time, love and serve the flock which Christ has entrusted to your care. Knowing how to balance the two. When you read Father Nicola's diary, his travels, let me personalize it. When I read the diaries of his travels and the diaries of his mentor, St. Raphael, his missionary travels, it humbles me and embarrasses me. Absolutely embarrasses me. That I dare feel tired with my travels. We got here in 5 hours from each on nice highways, up I-35 to I-80. I mean, you have 2 turns from Wichita to get to. Imagine what it was for Father Nicola and St. Raphael before him to travel. We knew we were coming to the holiday in Kearney. Father Christopher had made reservations for us. When St. Raphael came to Kearney, he knew not where he would lay his head that night. It ended up being on a divan. Father Nicola's soddy. And how dare I? How dare any of us really complain when we travel to do our Lord's work? We give glory to our good God who has raised up such a holy man here for us in the heartland that many of you can claim as a blood relative. The story of his life, and most especially the story of his sacrificial end to a sacrificial life, reads like ancient stories from the Holy Fathers. May God grant him paradise. May God grant that on that judgment day he be counted among the sheep and enter into the kingdom of heaven and intercede for us, all of us now, who as sons and daughters of Holy Orthodoxy here in the heartland of his spiritual children. Again, Father Christopher, the pilgrimage committee, and the entire community of St. George, Kearney, we are in your debt.
Thank you, Your Grace. Beautiful. And I'd like to add my thanks also to
Father Christopher and the committee for this wonderful, wonderful celebration. From the things I'm going to tell you, I think you will find that this is indeed a miracle. Some of the things I'm going to tell you. I came to Kearney in September of 1970 as a young, newly appointed professor of English at Kearney State College, which evolved after my time there into the University of Nebraska, Kearney. Shortly after taking up my work at the college, I ran into a young priest who was taking classes there in order to get a teacher's certificate, and it was Father Michael Haddad. And I had no idea that there was an Orthodox church here in this little town of about 11 or 12,000 people then. There were more people at the college, I think, than there were in the town. But I met Father Haddad, and I was a refugee from the Catholic Church after Vatican II, and I was so happy to hear that there was legitimate liturgy going on in Kearney, of all places in the world, and he said, "Oh, come over and see, come and see." St. Phillip the Apostle said that to Namee. So I came and saw. I had seen Orthodox services before. I had attended Eastern Rite Catholic services. I had attended Russian Orthodox churches when I was in the Army. So the liturgy was not entirely strange to me. But in Kearney, Nebraska, well, shortly after I started coming, because I came all the time here at St. George, and I met grandchildren and saw great-grandchildren of this Father Yanney that everybody talked about, and especially Manette Steinbrink and Margaret Shader, sisters, and both grandchildren, as the bishop said, of Father Yanney. Two little altar boys came out at the great entrance, and actually at the little entrance. Two little altar boys came out from the from the north door, and I found out that their names were Steinbrink. One of them was Rocky, and one of them was Steve. And they were really neat in their little altar boy outfit, shiny faces. And then I found out that they were Manette's and Paul's children, and that Manette was one of the grandchildren of the first pastor here, Father Yanney. In the course of the years that I visited every Sunday, I got to know a great deal about Manette and Margaret's grandfather, because they told me some of the very things that Father Christopher has now written down. And I was amazed. I thought, my goodness, what a figure. And they told about this vast territory that the bishops of actually it's the middle border of the United States, plus he even went outside the middle border up into Michigan and down into Missouri and places like that. And I'm thinking, my goodness, on trains, and once in a while he'd get a ride maybe in a horse and buggy, as did St. Raphael get a ride in a horse and buggy when he was here. And well, there's one man, and I heard more and more and more about this wonderful person from his grandchildren. And their brother Vernon lived out in North Platte, and Vernon came quite often to church, and so I got to know them pretty well. I knew some of the people that Father Yanney had baptized. They were very, very old at the time, but they were very happy to let me know Father Yanney baptized me. Mark of honor. Not only relatives of Father Yanney, but descendants of the founding fathers of the parish. Nick Shada,
I hope you get to, those of you who don't know Nick, get to see him. I think he's going to be coming tomorrow. Somebody said he's 94 years old now and hardly walk. But his dad, Sam Shada, was a very close friend and helper to Father Nicola. There's a picture of them standing outside the old church together, Sam Shada and Father Nicola. And Nick became a great champion of the story of Father Nicola. In 1984, and at the end of December of 1983, I got a letter from St. George Church, signed by Paul Steinbrink, Parish Council Chairman. And the letter asked me, "Dear Dr. Vreeland, how much do you intend to pledge to the support of St. George Church next year?" I said, "Well, no, I've been coming to church 14 years and I get this letter." And so I said to my dear wife, who was very supportive of my religious quest, I said, "I think they're trying to tell me something." I think in Paul Steinbrink's inimical way, he would probably have said, "We don't really want a bunch of freeloaders around." But I said, "Well, they're trying to tell me something. It's time for me to join the church." Now, I had read every book I could get my hands on about Orthodoxy. So it didn't take too long for Father Isa, John Isa, to take me into the church on Theophany of 1984. The parish sent me to the Parish Life Conference that year in Chicago. And a person sitting in this room who will go nameless, but his initials are Joe Maloli. Slipped me a $20 bill. He said, "Have fun in Chicago, Bill." I will. In those days, you could get a lot of fun out of $20. Thank you, Joe. I don't know I ever thanked you. So I went to the Parish Life Conference in Chicago, out by the airport. Big, big hotel, much bigger than this one. And people from all over the Midwest region. You see, Kearney was part of the Midwest region at that time. There was no diocese. There was no bishop in Wichita. The nearest bishop was Toledo, Ohio. Archbishop Michael of happy memory. So I went to this Parish Life Conference, and I was overwhelmed. All these people, probably as many people as there are here. And since I was sort of a delegate, after all, I had $20 to spend, and I got a badge, and I went into the business meeting that they were having. I thought, wow, all these high finances for a country boy from Nebraska, that's something else. And part of the business meeting was a politicking to see who would be the president of Midwest Soyo. In those days, Soyo was everybody, the old and the young and the middle and the mid-teens. Everybody was Soyo. I don't think it had anything to do with youth. S-O-Y-O. Anyway, they were having a presidential election, and the candidates got up and gave speeches telling why each one would be a good president of Midwest Soyo. And one of them stood up there and he said, "I'd be a good president for Soyo in Midwest because I've been to every parish in this region except Kearney, Nebraska." We've come a long way, baby. Anyway, fast forward to 1989, by the grace of God, and I don't know what all went on, but in 1989, I had finished a course of study to be a deacon. I was made a deacon in 1988, and in 1989, they couldn't get a priest to come to Kearney. Father Isa was transferred, and they could not get another priest to come. Priests who were told they were coming to Kearney said, "No, I won't go to Kearney," and they were put on immediate leave of absence. I'm not going to Kearney. Metropolitan Phillip says, well, you got a deacon out there, don't you? Ordain him a priest and let him. I wanted to be the deacon of St. George Church till they buried me here, and in that case, you see, how would be Father Christopher doing the honors? But anyway, God had a different mind, so I was made pastor of St. George. But I already knew so many of the folks that, it was kind of strange. But anyway, my first baptism was of Paul and Mitzi's granddaughter, and Steve's daughter, Kimberly, who is now a mother with the third generation. How many? Third now? Great, great, great grandchild of Father Nicola. Historical people. In early 1990, I got a letter from a Father BASIL of St. George Parish in Wichita, pastor. I knew the name. I had never met the man, but I knew the name because he was one of my teachers in that course that I took to become a deacon. In fact, he was the registrar of the program I was in. And the first letter I ever got from him said, "Dear Dr. Vreeland." He's never called me doctor since.
He said he would later on.
Anyway, Father Basil sent me this picture, and it was of a priest sitting there with 3 young boys standing beside him. And he said, dear Father Phillip, could you tell me if this is Father Nicola Yanney or not? And so I showed it to Minette and to Margaret. They go, sure, that's grandfather. And those are his sons. And this is our dad. Dad might have been 14 or so at the time. So I wrote back to Father Basil of St. George Church, who a couple years later became Bishop Basil. And you know the rest is history. In 1999, I retired from St. George Church. I said, I'll give it 10 years. And if I survive 10 years, I'm retired. I wrote to Metropolitan Phillip and I said, I want to retire. He wrote back, you can't retire. I haven't heard one complaint. By this time, Bishop Basil was bishop, and I cried on his shoulders. The reason he hadn't heard one complaint is I swallowed them all. So I had my physician write a letter to the Metropolitan begging him to let that poor, tired out old priest, and I had put in 30 years as a school teacher in Nebraska, and I said, hey, come on, I need to go out to pasture. And so the Metropolitan reluctantly let me retire, thinking probably if I don't, he'll probably sue me for some health reason or another. But I was like an old war horse by that time, or a fire horse, and I'd hear the fire bell ringing, and I'd get into harness. Father Phillip, would you come and substitute for me next Sunday? Father Phillip, would you come and substitute me for 2 weeks? Father Phillip, would you come here? Would you go there? Would you start a mission out here? Would you help start a mission there, the other place? And so from 1999 until now, I've kind of been back in the saddle again, so to speak, but I've got my pension and all that stuff, so I'm not on anybody's payroll. In Salina, it's Father Chad started a beautiful little parish in Salina. At one time I was substituting for him, and a young man came up and he says, well, you're from Kearney, huh? And I said, yes. He said, I've heard something about this Father Yanney up there. So I gave him the 15 or 20 minute speech. He got all excited. His name was Andrew Walker. He says, I'd like to do some research about that. Maybe the idea to write a book or something like that. I said, well, go on up to Kearney and talk to the priest there, Father Paul Hodge, and he'll show you around and he'll introduce you to some of Father Yanney's descendants and so on and so forth. So Andrew came up here and got Father Paul Hodge all excited. He says, hey, that sounds good. So Father Paul started digging into the history of Father Yanney, and all sorts of good stuff was uncovered. But from the time Bishop Basil came here in 1993, to celebrate the 90th anniversary of this parish, he took up the banner of Father Nicola Yanney. I took him out to the cemetery and showed him where Father Nicola was buried. He said he needs a better tombstone than that little tiny headstone was there. That was in 1993. And he has been the champion of Father Nicola Yanney ever since, and wherever he goes, and he goes to more places than I ever went, as they called me Father Phillip. They called him Bishop BASIL, and wherever he went, he sang the praises of Father Nicola and what he had done in this area and even outside this area. So much of it is on Bishop BASIL. At every parish life conference, once we became part of the Southwest region, where people didn't say, Kearney, Nebraska. and then later on became part of the Diocese of Wichita, Mid-America. And every time Father Nicola's name would come up, and Bishop BASIL would say, and the mother church of this diocese is St. George of Kearney, Nebraska. And it was spoken with reverence. Well, I'll be forever grateful for that. Father Christopher came here in 2006 and took up the work to continue the study of Father Yanney, and the result of his work, well, everybody knows, and you'll know more about it too. But, you haven't told them about the book yet, have you? Don't be surprised if you see a book about it. I'm sorry that I talked so long. That's really all I have to say. God bless you all, and God keep Father Yanney's memory.
How do you follow that? It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm not here as an expert on Father Nicola, to be sure. And my only connection with Kearney, Nebraska, is sitting right next to me. Because my first connection, I should say, now because I'm making some more. Father Christopher and I were in seminary together at CT Cons for 2 years, and he was a year ahead of me. But I was thinking about, why. I was asking Father Christopher about this a few weeks ago. I said, "Now, why am I on that panel?" Because I thought to myself, well, they all have things to say about Father Nicola, but I kind of don't. Because I haven't done the research that they've done, and I don't have the experience that they have and that many of you have. But the thing that occurred to me is, as I was asking myself why it is that I'm here, the sort of immediate reason is that I was asked to come here by Ancient Faith Radio to record things going on so that other people can become aware of what we're doing. And that was not my idea. Apparently it was the pilgrimage committee contacted Ancient Faith and said, could you send somebody? And then they contacted me and said, so we have something for you to do. Oh yes, it was Levi, yes, we should thank Levi. Yeah. Thanks. But I still find myself drawn here. I want to be here, and not just to kind of do a job. His Grace spoke earlier about the fact that we're all drawn to holiness. As Orthodox Christians, we have a kind of nose for it, And you probably have discovered that the deeper you get into the faith, the more that you commit yourself to it, the more this is the case for you. You want to be in the presence of what's holy. And so the reason that we're here, whether you live here
and you just happen to come here tonight, or whether you're like me from some distance away. I came from eastern Pennsylvania today. The reason that we're here is as pilgrims. And I think it's absolutely appropriate that this event is referred to as a pilgrimage, and not just simply as like a celebration or a anniversary or something like that. It's pilgrimage. And I don't know if you know the Greek word for pilgrimage, but it's really beautiful actually. The Greek word is proskinema. If you know a little bit of Greek, you probably know that the word proskinesis, it means veneration. And proskinema comes from proskinesis. So when we go on pilgrimage, the point of it is to make a veneration. In January, I got to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Mountain of Athos. And boy, did we venerate. One thing after another, so many amazing, wondrous things and people. And so when you come on a pilgrimage, you come for the purpose of veneration. You come for the purpose of showing honor to what is holy, not just to remember, right? We're not just talking about a historical figure, right? Certainly Father Nicola is a historical figure, but we come rather to not just pay respects, not just sort of pay honor, but because we're drawn to holiness. Because we want to be in the presence of someone whom God has worked in. And one of the great gifts of orthodoxy to the world is the sense that God really does work in particular people and places. He became incarnate as a human, as a man, in actual matter, in a local place, a particular place and time. And so that means that matter has something to do with our faith. And so many of the saints that we talk about, or whether they're canonized saints or just simply one of the saints, we're all saints. That is to say, we're all set apart for God's service. So many of the holy people that we talk about in the Orthodox Church are from very, very distant places that probably most of us have never been to and will never go to. And probably many of us have trouble pronouncing. One of the things that's beautiful about talking about sanctity in a place like Nebraska, which I'm told now has a new tourist slogan, which is, and I'm not joking about this, honestly, it's not for everyone. I'm not making that up. The beautiful thing about talking about holiness in a place like Nebraska is not only just that it's a place that you can pronounce, but it conveys to you that God himself has come here. We know that God sent at least one saint here. I drove through Nebraska this summer, and Father Christopher took me out to the place where the Yanney family had their homestead. And I asked him, I said, St. Raphael came right here, this hill we're standing on. And he said, oh yes. And I said, well, what did he do here? He blessed these grounds. He celebrated the Divine Liturgy right here. I said, so we're in a holy place. This has been sanctified by an actual saint of the church. God cares for us so much that he gives us himself, even in the place that we are. I live in Pennsylvania where we're blessed to have had multiple saints come, including St. Raphael. And so he is a link between this place and mine. He didn't found my church, but it is recorded that he visited Allentown at least once, which is right the next town over from my church. I don't live in Allentown. I live in Namee, Pennsylvania. I consider Allentown to be our suburb because it's 3 years younger. What saints like Raphael or people who show forth the sanctity of God, like Father Nicola, show us is that the truth of our faith, the impact of our faith, the love of our God is not just a story from long ago and far away. It's right here, right now. Right here, right now. We're not here to read about the love of God. We're here to experience the love of God. And God gave this place a gift in the first priest who was ordained by a saint. St. Raphael Brooklyn, who is really a saint who connects with and represents all Orthodox Christians in America, no matter what their background is. I almost wept when we were praying the Akathist to St. Raphael earlier this evening, because if you listen to the words very closely, you hear about how he connected really with every kind of person that he met, no matter what their background was, no matter what their ethnicity was. And he gave of himself in the place where he was. And one of the gifts that he gave this place was Father Nicola Yanney. So I come as a pilgrim, just like so many of you, because I want to venerate the work of God in this place. And I want to be near it. I often have thought to myself over the last several hours that I've been here in Kearney, okay, I have work to do, I have to record and so forth. But there were several moments that I thought, I just want to turn it off and pray, which is probably mostly what I'm going to be doing. But don't worry, I'm going to get some good recordings. I hope that. So I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for the welcome that many of you have shown all of us, especially today, but I've been to your town a few times before, although it's usually been in the middle of the week, so I might not have met a number of you who live here. But I just want to encourage you and urge you to thank God for what he has done here, not just in the life of this priest, but also in the ministry that he performed here so that people would become holy. And then has been passed to the next generation and the next generation. See, this is the way the Christian faith works. It's not just something we remember from a long time ago. It's something that we're doing now. That we're doing now. It is true that we stand on the shoulders of giants, but we have to stand on them. We can't stand back and admire them. That's not what holy people are given to us for. Holy people are given to us so that they would show us the way, so that we would follow them. So that's why I'm here, because I want to get to know God's work here and to participate in it, even just in a small way, in this holy pilgrimage. Thank you very much for the gift that you are giving right now to many people throughout the world who are going to hear about what's happening here.
So you're going to hear plenty from me tomorrow, but I'll risk preempting myself by maybe saying something I think I actually say this tomorrow, but I'll say it now and then we'll figure it out. I first heard of Father, well, let me start with, I have spent my entire adult life studying the history of Orthodoxy in America. It's been a very peculiar obsession of mine. Like everybody has their thing, and that's my thing in a very obsessive way. So I've done an enormous amount of research, and when I first ran into the story of Father Nicola, I have to confess, I wasn't impressed initially. When I first heard of him, it was, I think, in Bishop BASIL's enthronement address. And he was talking about this pioneering priest who had this big territory and was responsible for starting a lot of churches. But to me, that was like, that's great. But everybody has somebody like that. All the Orthodox in America, different regions, different ethnic backgrounds, have a guy like that in their history, or multiple people like that in their history. And so initially I was just kind of like, oh, okay, he's sort of a footnote. He was the first priest ordained by St. Raphael. Okay, well, somebody had to be the first, you know? So it didn't really blow me away initially, and then I remember hearing about the diocesan pilgrimage 10 years ago, and I asked Bishop Basil afterwards, "Are you trying to start a canonization campaign or something?" And he said, "No, we're showing love toward our forefather. This is an act of love. It's not. There's no agenda here. We're doing this out of love." So that gave me a different perspective on Father Nicola, but I still viewed him as just kind of an interesting historical figure, but not necessarily standing out amongst the dozens of other priests who also had big territories and traveled around and so forth. It wasn't until it took a long time as I learned more and more and to just sort of delve deeper and deeper into his story. And there was a moment that tipped it for me with Father Nicola, and it was when Father Matthew Baker died. I don't know if some of you might remember Father Matthew Baker, a young priest who had six children, and died tragically in a car accident several years ago. And when that happened, for some reason, and I don't really know why it occurred to me, I asked Father Christopher if he could write something for the website that I run called Orthodox History about Father Nicola. And I said, "Can you write something about Father Nicola's suffering?" Because I think all of us who knew about this, there were thousands of people following and contributing money and to the family of Father Matthew Baker, and there was this, it's just, everybody could kind of feel this great suffering that this young widow and her 6 children, and this was this horrible thing that had happened, and so I asked Father Christopher to write something about Father Nicola's suffering, and he wrote this beautiful article called "A Man of Sorrows and of Faith," and he walked through Father Nicola's life from the perspective of Father Nicola's suffering. And it was a really moving thing for me personally to read what Father Christopher wrote that gave me a really fresh perspective on Father Nicola, to really appreciate the extent to which he suffered. And the fact that I don't know, myself included, I don't know how many of us could deal with that degree of suffering that many times, and not only remain faithful, but actually take on more, voluntarily take on more. In the case of Father Nicola becoming a priest after his wife died, and he had 4 small children to take care of as a 29-year-old single immigrant farmer. Again, I don't want to preempt myself too much, but that was the point for me that really changed my perspective on Father Nicola fully. I don't know, sort of a gradual process. And as I started looking deeper into his life myself, it became clear to me that he really is an exceptional figure. But it has nothing for me, and this I'm not speaking for anybody else, for me it has nothing to do with the fact that he's in mid-America, or he founded a lot of parishes, or he was the first priest ordained by St. Raphael, although those are all very important things. To me, and the thing I think, the shift I see taking place now in the way we are starting to see Father Nicola understood, is that he's not just for the Antiochian Diocese of Wichita and Mid-America. That Father Nicola is for the whole Orthodox Church. And he has something to say to the whole Orthodox Church. And his life needs to be known by the whole Orthodox Church. And so I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, we had some really wonderful reflections. We're not going to take questions because we've you all have traveled a long distance. I need to get home to bed. She can travel a long distance with us tomorrow out to the homestead. We will meet at 10 a.m. There's a lot of helpful information in your registration bags. There's maps, there's timetables. We'll meet at 10 a.m. at the Kearney Cemetery, at Father Nicola's grave. We'll have the Trisagion prayers there, weather permitting, and for those who would like. It's a free schedule, so you don't have to join us, but for those who would like, we will proceed from the cemetery after the prayers out to where Father Nicola and St. Raphael met, and then to the graveside of Father Nicola's wife, Maria Martha, and child, Newell, their fifth child. A brief announcement about that. The roads that we're going on have not been changed since St. Raphael traveled on them in 1899 in an open wagon. They're unmaintained. So if we have a lot of cars out there, just be mindful of your mobility, your ability to walk the distance. We're not going to climb any mountains. We'll do this on the roadside. But please, if you're unstable or can't walk far or have a questionable vehicle, carpool or discern whether or not you should go on this. What other announcements do I have? Pick up your children. Don't believe what Father Phillip says about certain things. We are going to have an open church tomorrow from 1 to 4, a tour. You're welcome to come to that. There will be some artifacts of Father Nicola's, his sacramental books, his family Bible, a few other things, his pocket watch. There'll be some photos, historical photos. You'll be able to see some of the new iconography that we have in the church and enjoy some hospitality from some of our ladies downstairs. We'll have Vespers with His Grace at 5, followed by a banquet at the Holiday Inn at 7. We'll make some more announcements about that. Am I missing anything, Sarah? Do I need to? Okay. So, let's 10 o'clock at the cemetery.
As you know from the history of the parish, the first Orthodox priest to visit Kearney became also the first Orthodox bishop to visit Kearney, and that's St. Raphael. So let's sing the Apologetic and the Troparion for St. Raphael.
Rejoice, O Father Raphael, adornment of the Holy Church. Thou art champion of the true faith, seeker of the lost, consolation of the oppressed, Father to orphans and friend of the poor, peacemaker and good shepherd, joy of all the Orthodox, Son of Antioch, boast of America, intercede with Christ God for us, and for all who honor thee.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, both now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Master, bless.
God is with us through His divine grace and love toward mankind always, now and ever, and unto ages of age. Amen. 10 a.m. at the cemetery at the gravesite of Father Nicola.